All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. There's still some people that are trying to join, so we'll let them start dialing in. But we just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for joining our Coffee Chat with Catalyst today, our weekly Wednesday series. We really appreciate all of you who have joined. If this is our third installation, so if you've been on in the past, we appreciate you joining us again. But first, if everyone just take a couple deep breaths, settle in. This will be about 30 to 45-minute conversations with a few experts on operations and finance. And, you know, given the recent events, we're all a bit concerned about our finances, I believe, both business-wise and personally, and maybe more now than even the last 10 to 12 years. So a little bit of background on us. I'm Robert Fowler, the co-founder and CCO of CatalystCreativ. And CatalystCreativ is a creative agency focused on branding, marketing, and events. And we have a proprietary method called the 7th Level Engagement Framework. Catalyst started just over 7 years ago, and we've been a fully remote team since day one. So if you joined our past chats, you probably heard all about remote work and engagement. If not, we've still got those recordings that we can share with you. So feel free to send us an email to coffee. It's on the screen here. It's coffee@CatalystCreativ, no E at the end of creative.com. And for those of you who have dialed in, feel free throughout the session, if you have any questions and you can't put them in the Zoom chat, you can send them to that email address and we'll get them answered. So, you know, these talks really came out of necessity. I think over the last couple of weeks, we just have wanted to help. We didn't know how we could help. We didn't really know what we could do, but we thought maybe we could do it in this way. And the response has been really great. And just trying to build some bridges and connections with our existing community, you know, maybe reach out to some new people, provide resources and the connections to those resources is really the goals of these. So I'm super excited for today. We have two amazing guests with us. The first is our very own Director of Operations, Abby Etherly. And Abby really keeps our fully remote team organized. She handles all of our finances, all those finance functions and payroll. And then next we have a special guest by the name of Anthony Rosen, who's a CFO at Propeller Industries and focuses on e-commerce. Anthony's career has been focused on restructuring and consulting throughout the US, all over Europe and Australia. And today, Anthony oversees 30 startups as CFO. And he really has some great insights about the current pandemic as related to finance. So Anthony also happens to be my husband. So I've heard a lot of phone calls with him and his clients over the last few weeks. And I really thought it would be great for him to join us so he could give us some tips for navigating these new waters. So we really hope that this conversation will be helpful for business owners, managers, employees, people who are thinking they're starting their own venture. And when we were kind of putting together some of the points for this call, I kind of was reading a couple articles and realized that during the last financial crisis, some of the biggest companies that a lot of us use every single day, like Uber, Lyft, WhatsApp, were all started during that time. So for those of you who are innovators and creators, there's definitely, and have that entrepreneurial mind, there's really going to be some opportunity to take advantage of these times and a little bit of extra space to really create. So again, continue adding questions and answers below. Email them to us at the coffee email address, and we'll try to get those answered. So I'd like to start off by sharing an article that our co-founder Amanda shared with me yesterday from the Harvard Business Review. And yesterday I was having a particularly tough day. I'm going to be honest, it seems like reality really sort of set in for me. And the road ahead seemed pretty long, and it had just kind of got to me. So I don't know if anyone else has felt that way this week, but Harvard Business Review did an interview with Dr. David Kessler, who's the world's foremost expert on grief. And in the interview, I just want to share this quote that he said, that we're feeling a number of different griefs. We feel the world has changed, and it has. We know this is temporary, but it doesn't feel that way. And we realize things will be different. Just as going to the airport is forever different from how it was before 9/11, things will change, and at this point at which they have changed. The loss of normalcy, the fear of economic toll, loss of connection, it's hitting us and we're grieving collectively. We are not used to this kind of grief in the air. And I really don't think I could have said it any better myself. And for me, I'm really missing the connections with others more than anything, but just trying to realize that this probably is our new reality for a while and trying to make the most of it. Another call that I listen to each week is provided by the Raymond James Financial Advisors. And we all know that there's economic stimulus packages from the federal government that are enormous, and they're coming in phases, and they can be a bit confusing. And on their call on Monday, they mentioned that there's a 40% probability of things turning a corner by Memorial Day, and probably only an 80% probability that they'll be turning the corner by Labor Day. So both of those dates seem super far away from me. So learning how to deal the best we can, during these times is really all we can do. So they mentioned that there's probably still some additional stimulus packages coming. So Anthony and Abby have almost become experts in these. So we'll be touching on those today as they relate to small business. So this is just going to be an informal Q&A. I'll be asking Abby and Anthony some questions. I guess we can go ahead and jump in. So I guess my first question is for both of you, and thank you again for being on, is during the last 4 weeks, what has changed for you personally on a day-to-day basis in your role, or how are you helping your clients, and how does that differ from the previous months or years? So, Ant, I'll let you kind of jump in, but just, yeah, how have things changed for you?
Great. Well, first off, thank you for inviting me to your coffee chat. Having lived with someone who works in the world of creative, I know that the worlds of finance and creative don't always align, and they don't always come together. And these are not normal times that we live in. So the role of finance organization and finance team has certainly come to the forefront more than ever. I think in previous months and years, it's all been about sales and marketing and growth, and now the finance person in the organization is sort of coming to the forefront. And I think about sort of what's changed the most over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I think, one thing is definitely the speed of decision making. I think, in the past, people look at their financials once a month or once a quarter or once a year, and that just doesn't suffice in sort of the days that we're living, when sort of things are changing day to day and week to week. And one of the things I'm having to do with all my clients is just review the finances on a much more frequent basis. So, whether that's putting in place a weekly cash flow or some other process, but just, making decisions and looking at the financials on a much more timely basis has definitely changed. I think, one other thing that's changed is just really people, cash has always been king, that's the saying, and people always sort of focus on their cash, but, just making sure that your cash runway is extended as long as possible, which basically means, having enough cash in the bank to last as long as you possibly can. And, for some of my clients, that's only 1, 2, 3, 6 months, but, ideally, given all the uncertainty in the world we live in today, people really want to try and have at least 12 months of runway and cash in the bank, if possible. So, lots of other things have changed, obviously, but those are a few of the things.
Absolutely. Before we jump to Abby, one thing you mentioned was about the cash runway. 12 months seems a little daunting, I'm sure, for some of us with small businesses. Just curious, do you have any alternative ideas, without like getting too overly technical, of other ways that people don't feel like they have a 12 plus, month runway of cash, of what they could be doing during these times?
Yeah, one thing is certainly, and we'll get into this a little bit more detail, I think later on, is sort of all these government programs that have come out. They're at the city level, at the state level, at the federal level, a lot of relief out there. I'm sure you guys have read about it in the news, and there's a lot out there. So I think we'll get into that a little bit later, but that's one thing. I think another thing is sort of having a look, if you have sort of existing credit lines or debt facilities with your bank, certainly talking to your bank and seeing if there's any ability to sort of draw down on those credit lines is definitely something sort of advising all my clients to do. I think another big one is obviously sort of going to your suppliers and your vendors and trying to negotiate not just pricing, but also payment terms. So people who you previously were on 15 or 30-day terms, trying to get sort of 45 or 60-day terms with them could be great. Every day counts, obviously, and if you can get an extra sort of 2 weeks or a month to pay bills, that would be great. I think, you obviously focus on the suppliers that you have the best relationship with. And I think, one thing I'm telling the clients is sort of don't be afraid to get creative. I think, another potential solution that I'm working on with one of my clients is sort of changing the terms from instead of, paying a fixed dollar amount to paying a percentage of your sales. So, if you owe a client $100,000 or a vendor, sorry, rather than paying them a fixed $100,000, if you don't know what your sales are going to be, you can try and negotiate something that's more flexible so that you sort of pay them over time, as your sales come in. And then one last thing would be sort of credit cards. Obviously, sort of talking to your credit card company, seeing if you can get any sort of increased limit from them is another thing to sort of think about.
Awesome. Those seem pretty straightforward. Abby, maybe you can share a little bit about what we at Catalyst are doing, and as well, if there's anything that you want to add from what Anthony had suggested.
Yeah, very similar, just as Anthony alluded to, simply eliminating spending on non-essential items, evaluating any paid subscriptions you might have, downgrading to the free versions when possible, not purchasing new equipment. We've even gone as far as asking team members that have company credit cards, just remove them from your wallet, resist temptations. We're a paperless company with a fully remote staff, so we don't have a lot of overhead. So as Anthony said, we've been reaching out to vendors, banks, credit card companies, and just discussing the relief options that they're offering.
Cool. Yeah, I think those are great. And maybe you could just tell us, how has the response been? And Anthony, if you have anything to add, but Abby, how has the response been, do you feel like, when you've been reaching out?
I would definitely say overall very positive. My experience with American Express stands out. They not only explained their deferment options and how they're treating late fees and interest, they even volunteered general advice and provided websites to go to for researching those government programs. Given everything that they're dealing with and the stories I'm sure they're hearing on a daily basis, I feel that they're going above and beyond in their customer service.
Awesome. Yeah, American Express is great. Ant, what about you?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing sort of the same thing as Abby. I think everyone realizes that these are sort of unprecedented times and people want to work with you. I think, the thing people have to keep in mind is, everyone's facing their own sort of financial issues at the moment. So if you're talking to a vendor, trying to sort of negotiate something, you have to sort of consider that vendor is dealing with their own issues potentially. So really trying to focus on sort of people like American Express, who are sound and strong and are going to be in a much better position to negotiate and give you extended terms. I know Facebook and Google, sort of publicly come out with programs that they've launched to sort of help their customers as well. So because generally the feedback's been pretty good, and people want to keep you for the long term as a customer, so they want to work with you.
For sure. Awesome. I think, in a service-based company like Catalyst, our team salaries is probably like our largest line item. I hate to even bring this up, but it's something that we're all probably facing, is if companies are at the point where they need to reduce the size of their team, what do you suggest? Do you ask employees to reduce their salary and then also, how many hours they work, or do you try to reduce the team by a few people? Abby or Ant, do you have any suggestions on that?
Like I said, many variables to that question. I would say that times like this are providing good opportunities for owners and managers to show that they value their employees. We've read so many amazing stories of corporations that are sending their employees home with pay, or CEOs that are forgoing their salary to ensure their employees can still be paid. However, most small businesses like ours simply can't afford to do that, even when business is normal. So for those business owners, I'd say use this time to communicate and listen to the members of your team, ensure them that layoffs are the last resort, and of course, allow them to take sick leave and keep themselves healthy. Take the time to research and apply for government programs that were designed to provide you relief, and such as the Payroll Protection Program.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we'll definitely be sending around, so everyone who's listening in this call, the resources. Ant, what have you been advising your clients to do?
Yeah, I think, like Abby said, it's definitely a tough decision to make, but unfortunately, it's one that people have to sort of look at. And I think, as Abby sort of alluded to, I think people can sort of get creative, and there's a lot more options out there than just sort of doing traditional layoffs. I think there's people are doing furloughs. People are trying to convert people from full-time to part-time. potentially doing salary cuts, potentially also doing salary cuts in exchange for equity. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to try and be creative, to try and save cost on that. I think the key thing that I'm sort of doing with all of my clients is scenario planning. I think, given all of the uncertainty today, we don't know, people don't know exactly what their revenue is going to be over the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. So I think, the goal and what I'm trying to do with most of my clients is sort of run a bunch of different scenarios, figure out sort of different costs that you can cut in different scenarios, depending on sort of how you think, how things end up. And then, just making sure that you review those scenarios, frequently, as I talked about earlier. So not, every month, but, every week. I think another thing, founders and finance people can do is just making sure they're talking to their network out there. So, talk to other small business owners, other peers, other founders that and see what they're doing. It's, one of the things I always tell my clients.
Awesome. Yeah, those are super helpful. And continue, I see that we do have the Q&A portion below, so make sure that you guys are adding your questions as they come up, and we'll make sure to get them over to Anthony and to Abby. So I think the words SBA loans have been flying around the news, obviously through Congress, the media, business publications, and there's so much confusion about these loans. I've heard grumblings from a lot of people about actually the sites crashing and trying to apply and the queues that they've had to wait in. So Anthony, I know that you've really sort of become an expert in these loans, and Abby may have become an expert in the waiting game of applying for these loans. But I do hear that that's got better. But maybe if you could just give us, since the whole sort of finance thing is your strong suit, if you could just maybe tell us really what these two loans are and maybe a little bit about what they entail.
Sure. Well, I never thought I would be an expert in SBA loans. And I guess I should start by saying what SBA stands for, because most people, including me before a week ago, didn't know. It's basically the Small Business Administration. So this is a program that always existed out there by the federal government, and it was traditionally done to sort of help people who were part of a disaster, like a hurricane or a tornado or something, to sort of apply for loans for their houses. So they've sort of taken that program and molded it for this crisis, which is obviously different and unique. So it's super technical, and I'm not going to be able to get into all of that on the phone, but I think, and one of the things we should pass out is the resource. There's one really good website, which is the National Venture Capital Association, nvca.org, which is super up to date, on all this information. So if you want to get into all the nitty gritty afterwards, you can go to that website. Just to give a high level overview though, there's sort of two main programs. One program, which is called, EIDL, which is an Economic Injury Disaster Loan. These are loans that can be taken for up to $2 million. So they're obviously pretty big loans. The application process is pretty straightforward. It can be done online. Assuming the site doesn't crash, you can do it online with very limited financial information. And you really just have to have been negatively impacted by COVID. So the application is pretty straightforward. What will happen after that is you'll get contacted by a loan officer, and you'll have to submit additional information, but you can get up to $2 million. There are certain things to keep in mind, like potentially a personal guarantee could be required for loans over a certain dollar amount, which at the moment is $200,000. But that's a loan that's really meant for companies that have been super negatively impacted by COVID. So where revenue has gone way down, and they, it's basically a disaster equivalent to a hurricane. The other loan, which has not actually launched yet, which is actually supposed to launch on Friday, which is part of SBA, is called PPP. That's Paycheck Protection Program. This loan is a slightly different calculation. So rather than just be sort of any number under $2 million where you don't actually know what you're going to get, the maximum amount of this loan is 2.5 times your monthly payroll. So if your monthly payroll is $10,000, you could get up to $25,000 from this loan. The good thing about this loan is that there's no personal guarantees required. And we think the application, when it launches on Friday, is going to be more straightforward than the other one, and it will happen pretty quickly. And you should be able to get money pretty quickly, we hope. The last point about this one is to say the application for PPP is actually done through your bank. It's not done directly on the website, so you should contact your bank and find out if they are sort of accredited. You know, all the big banks like Chase and Wells Fargo and B of A will be accredited, but if you're with a smaller bank, you'll want to reach out to your banker and ask them whether they're SBA accredited to give these loans. And if not, you can find another bank to do it with. But that's high level. Stuff is still coming out every day, and go to the nvca.org website for further info.
And that's nvca.org. We put it in the chat. And again, we'll be sending out all the links that Mike and Abby, that Anthony and Abby discuss, and we'll make sure that that's in the recap of this. So, you know, I think in addition to the SBA loans, Abby, are there any particular processes that we use that might be helpful for other companies at this time to use, even if you're not necessarily in just like the finance part?
Yes, operationally speaking, I am a strong advocate for online platforms. Might be hard to believe, but some companies have still been using paper forms for HR processes, such as PTO requests, sometimes even requiring hand signatures on them. A simple remote work adjustment can be accepting requests via email or setting up Google Forms. However, those would still require manual input by a payroll team. Here at Catalyst, we use Zenefits, which is an online platform that I love. It's an all-in-one system. It allows our team to log in, submit PTO and sick leave requests for approval. When they're logged in, they can see a list of any other employees that have already requested time off, plus it imports approved time off directly into our shared work calendars that I know we've talked about how much we rely on. Notification requests aren't too relevant right now, but systems like this also allow HR professionals to easily update salaries and employment status for employees to update their personal information on their own whenever they need as well.
Awesome. Yeah, Zenefits has been super helpful, especially having gotten married last year, like all the changes and everything. It's been great. So typically, Anthony and I are usually based in New York City, and as well as a lot of our friends and a few of our other colleagues, including Amanda, our co-founder. So one of the things that, and I don't know if you guys have thought about this much, but so many people have left the city, especially if they lived in a very metropolitan area, have left to either go stay with family and friends outside of New York City or whatever large city that they were in. So I'm curious if either of you, maybe Abby, what will be happening? Catalyst is fully remote, and we're all sort of hopping around to different places. So, you know, and who knows how long that could last. So how do you suggest dealing with taxes in multiple states, or given the circumstances, do you think it's even going to be an issue?
Well, I will say that each state handles their payroll taxes differently as far as how long you have to live there to be considered a resident. I haven't dealt with all states, but at some point, yes, they will all require you to set up a tax account and an unemployment account. Some states, such as California and Colorado, also require you to apply for an LLC. Some cities, larger cities especially, Denver, Philadelphia, they require an additional city tax account to be set up. This, of course, means you're going to deal with multiple tax filings and making sure everything's set up correctly with your payroll company. I would like to see that they might be a little bit more flexible with this because of the situation, but time will tell.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's super helpful. And, you know, the other thing, because we are fully remote and we don't have an office or overhead, and just curious, like, are you seeing anyone handling clients, if they're handling payroll differently or taxes or rent or anything like that during this time?
Yeah, you know, I think on the payroll and taxes side, I haven't seen any changes yet. I think it's obviously only been like 3 or 4 weeks. So for the most part, other than, you know, people working remote from home, you know, most of my clients use a tool similar to what you talked about earlier with Zenefits. Most of them are on a PEO like JustWorks or Gusto, and so that can handle that pretty seamlessly, which is nice. You know, I think you mentioned rent, and I think that's actually an important thing I didn't mention earlier, but as part of that sort of extension of cash runway and negotiation with suppliers, I think rent is something that, everyone should think about. I think, in normal times, rent is sort of off the table. You've signed a lease, you got to pay your rent. There's nothing you can do about it. But these are not normal times, again, as we talked about. And in my experience over the last 3 or 4 weeks, and a bunch of my clients, having discussions with landlords is definitely something that you can do and should do. And landlords are very open to that. Again, they want to keep you as a tenant for the long term. So they, want to find a way to work with you. I think, just being open, the advice I'd give there is just be open and transparent with them and communicate with them, and don't just not pay your rent. Have a discussion with them about trying to defer it potentially. So sort of defer rent payments till later in the year or next year. Or, the other thing I'd say there is look at the jurisdiction that you're in, and depending on the state or city, some states and cities are actually giving you relief on rent as well. I know New York has a bill in the works that hasn't been approved yet, I think, but if it does, it would actually waive rent for 90 days, I think, for any commercial tenant. So this is not office work or obviously your personal rent, but any sort of commercial property that was forced to close by the state. If this law passes, you would get 90 days rent-free, basically, and you wouldn't have to pay that. So I think, just again, whatever state you're in, do some research on Google, see what sort of laws or bills are out there, and be open to having a discussion, with your landlord.
Great. That's super helpful. Yeah. So pivoting just a little bit from the technical aspects of things, when Catalyst was started in downtown Las Vegas, we hosted these monthly gatherings called Catalyst Week. Some of you guys who are on the call may have actually attended, but there were other weeks that happened in downtown Las Vegas, 7 years ago, that were focused on fashion and tech and innovation and that sort of things. But Catalyst was sort of known as the weeks that brought everyone together, where everyone got a little bit emotional. We did, really did our best to create deep connections and vulnerability with each attendee. And I think it's something that's really carried us through with all of our projects and all of our clients and the relationships that we have with those people. And so I think, sort of as you alluded, Anthony, is and using the relationships that you have with your landlords, and not necessarily going the legal route, but just sort of the understanding route. I think a little compassion and some understanding is really the greatest need right now. And I think we've all got different levels of fear, and grief manifests itself in so many different ways. But even the other day, someone got a little snippy with me, and I just thought, that's so not like this person, but I realized that's how they're dealing with this. And, we're all seeing each other's fear and anxiety. So I think, Abby deals with our team, and it is my saving grace. We talk so often about so many different things, but I'm curious, Abby, if you have any suggestions from like an HR operations standpoint on how to keep team confidence high and make sure everyone feels supported and understood, and sort of extending that compassionate arm from an operations or HR standpoint.
Yeah, like you said, the open communication is always key, and providing a space for your team to share. As we've mentioned on previous calls, like our team has weekly video check-ins to start the week. We talk about our weekends and our workloads, and oftentimes these become moments of sharing emotions as well. In the last few weeks, we've also had several employees using our team Slack channel to share motivational quotes or suggest meditations. Now, I know not everyone is as comfortable sharing in groups or sharing their personal feelings with their coworkers. So I'd suggest researching HR feedback programs such as Speakfully. They provide a more anonymous approach to sharing these types.
Cool. Yeah, we've been lucky enough to work with Speakfully for really since they started, and they're such a great platform. And especially if you're new to remote work and having team members that are having a hard time communicating with management, or even you in your own position, it's definitely something that you could suggest. So it doesn't look like that we've had any questions pop up now. So if you've got any of those, just because we've only got a few minutes left, about 15 minutes left, I want to make sure those get answered. But while everyone's putting in their questions, I listened to, I don't know if I've been joining tons of webinars and podcasts and things. And I listened in on Dr. Laurie Santos, who's a psychology professor at Yale, give a talk earlier this week. And she ended this session sort of the same way that I've ended the last two coffee chats. And I think if you don't hear anything else on the call today, is remember that self-care and giving yourself some grace during these times is so important. We're all experiencing some new challenges, working from home, financial hardships, employee engagement. All these things are first for a lot of people. And I just think that for us, that's been the most important thing. And Anthony, I want you and Abby, if there's anything that you guys have to add, to feel free to jump in on that as well.
Yeah, I think, the last bit of sort of words of advice, I guess, as I was sort of thinking about final words, I think one thing is a quote that I didn't make up, but I heard again on another webinar that I was attending for a few venture capital firms. And somebody said, nobody was ever criticized for overreacting or cutting too much in a crisis. I think that's important to consider. I think you could definitely get criticized for not doing anything or not cutting enough and your business not surviving, but nobody's ever going to come back to you down the road, given the level of uncertainty, and say, oh, you did too much, you overreacted. So just keep that in mind, and also sort of keep in mind that, the year 2020 is always going to have an asterisk next to it. So whenever you're sort of looking at your financials or your results of 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, there's always going to be an asterisk next to 2020. So don't freak out if your numbers are not looking like what they were supposed to be, because nobody's are. And so keep that in mind. And then again, as sort of a CFO and finance person, we talked about cash and how important it is to sort of extend your runway, but just keep in mind that, if you're cash flow positive and you sort of control your cash, then you have control over your destiny. So the more you have sort of control of your cash and the more cash you have in the bank, and the longer you can make it last, the more control you have over your destiny. You're not reliant on landlords or other vendors or suppliers of what they're going to do, but you sort of take control yourself. So just focus on that and always focus on the cash.
For sure. And Blair did have one question, and I'll read it because I know you're on the phone. And her question is, what about the 10K disaster relief? Blair said that their CPA reached out saying that they could apply. Do you know anything about the 10K disaster relief?
I don't know specifically about 10K, but I do know. So, but I do know that, like I think I mentioned earlier, the disaster relief programs that were around before are also still around. I think that the programs that I talked about are additional programs or tweaks, but from what I know, the programs that were around before are potentially still around. But I don't know specifically about 10K, but I think, again, if you go to the SBA website, I think they'll hopefully make it pretty clear, and you can sort of follow with that if that application process is still open.
Awesome. And another question, Abby, maybe you can take this one. It's from Mike. Should your significant other be impacted by this pandemic, i.e. a pay cut, furlough, what do you advise? Abby?
Oh, sorry.
No.
I guess I'm not quite sure as far as, I guess I need a little more detail on that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think that I can jump in on it as well. I think, that we're all sort of in the same way that all of these questions that have come up have been around business. I think there's a lot of programs that are actually out there for individuals as well, in terms of reaching out to American Express or your credit card and letting them know the situation of what's going on, reaching out if you have a mortgage to your mortgage company and asking them if they have any programs or any assistance for that. There's a few calls, like I said, that I've been joining, and there's a bunch of resources out there that are more on the personal side. But I think that all investors, all banks, all financial institutions realize that this is a business thing, but it's also it's also hugely personal. So just seeing what you can do, obviously, reducing spending as much as possible, leaning into that savings a little bit if you have to. And again, just kind of, you know, taking a bit of compassion for each other in that, because I know that that's a super hard time. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So feel free to email us, myself, Robert at CatalystCreativ, no E, or Coffee at CatalystCreativ, no E. Just if you've got any other questions, we'll be sending out the recording from this as well as the links. Special thanks to Abby and to Anthony for sharing your experience and your expertise. And for those of you who are on the call, we have a really awesome guest next week, spoken word poet and author NQ. He's just recently released a book, so please definitely come back and join us next week. He's going to be doing a performance over the webinar of one of his poems, and then also sharing a little bit from his new book. And he's just has an awesome energy and is just a great person. So I can't wait to have him on. But thanks again to everyone who joined us today, and hope this was a little bright light in the middle of your week, and wishing you and your family keeping safe and well. And let us know if there's anything that we at Catalyst can do for you. Thanks so much for joining.